Fulgrim The Perfect Son. There's a lot to unpack here. Is it a perfect book? No. But is it a good book? A fun read and setting the stage for more of the same? Yes, indeed it is. Now, people are arguing online, even here on YouTube, that either this book changes everything or this book changes nothing. Two extreme and diametrically opposed arguments. Now, as for me, I tend to lean toward it being a lot more significant than one might think, and certainly more than the naysayers are crediting it for being. So I'll start by talking about the general themes, tropes, and lore that Perfect Son uses, and any praise and criticism I have for the book and how it was written. But then in the second part of the video, I'm going to be going into full-on spoiler territory. So this is a heads up. I'll let you know before we cross the threshold, the point of no return, into the gullet of Slaanesh, for those of you who are going to read it and want to avoid spoilers. Okay, so starting off, I have to say that I had a great time with this one, and the pacing was really good. It's the kind of book you can fly through if you want to, but the chapters create great break points, and it is also easy to get back to. That said, it does follow four distinct points of view. So first, you have the main protagonist of the story, Tamarus, who is an Emperor's Children champion blade master, and his rival in the 3rd Legion, the sorcerer Mavai. We follow a regular human of the Astra Militarum named Talith Secundar, and we follow Johannes Berenger, the Emperor's champion of the Black Templars. The setting is the mining world of Crucible and its hive city, Citadel, so very 40K in that regard. It feels oppressive and rigid, grimdark as all hell. You really wouldn't want to live there, and the people are miserable. They just mine ore and stuff like that, toiling away to pay their imperial tithe, barely getting enough corpse starch to remain alive, but never enough to fill their bellies. So it is a bleak place, but it is a blank canvas of grimdarkness upon which the most exquisite portrait was painted. I liked the characters and the tropes that were surrounding them, the way they acted and responded to the situations they were in. It was great. And there was a lot of pitting of ideologies against one another. Loyalist versus heretic belief systems were constantly played with, but this book gave us a third option. For the first time, possibly ever in Warhammer, the path of the antitheist, the one who doesn't feel constrained by either side anymore as they've seen it is all BS and manipulation. Treachery, loyalty, betrayal, excess, delusion, and unnecessary suffering are all themes that play out throughout this book. The entire story is basically one siege, and we get to see how it affects the average, everyday person. Keep in mind that they were suffering horribly under Imperial rule, and that was before the Templars or the Emperor's Children showed up. So, what did I like about this one? Well, the story was certainly compelling, and well-paced, and really fun to read. I knew going in that it wasn't actually about Fulgrim, though. He does return and brings his attention back to the galaxy, but it is not actually about him at all, except that it sort of is. One of those metaphorical conundrums that ties people's brains in knots. And it all comes down to the final words of the story. So, it was still exciting and action-packed, but that didn't stop it from having its flaws. And there were plenty of them, for sure. One thing that really got to me was the writer kept referring to very specific armor parts with the appropriate terminology. But she just kept doing it over and over and over. I mean, I was feeling word fatigue the 4th time I read the word sabaton, but she probably dropped it like 15 times in the story. At least she really knew what she was talking about, but it was tedious after a while for sure. There are a lot of kills in this book, a lot of melee kills specifically, and many of them are exactly the same, more or less. A swift decapitation executed with perfection. That got a little boring at times, but I do have to say, if you like honor duels, if you like the trope of one-on-one champions fighting at the gates before 2 onlooking armies, then this is the book for you. Now on to the elephant in the room. There are a lot of YouTubers screaming about how this book heralds the return of Rogal Dorn. And, well, it does not. Sure, it does have a vision, which comes partially to pass, but partially not to pass, and that is the critical part to emphasize here. Now, it is impossible to get into this one without diving deeper into spoiler country, but remember when I said delusion was a major theme in this book? Well, it looks like that has leaked out into the real world. Those who identify as Sons of Dorn, specifically Black Templars, have been jumping for joy over the excerpt that leaked early, but they haven't read the whole book, which is typical of Black Templars. They aren't exactly the brightest bunch, even for the sons of a guy who supposedly can't read. Okay, I jest, really. So with all that said, let's get into the spoilers and really talk about what it is that this story is about. It starts out with an Emperor's Children warband fighting World Eaters, perpetuating the great game as much as they can. And our main protagonist is this Blade Master who is totally incredible, just tearing through Khorne demons and World Eater Space Marines with relative ease. He impales one through the mouth and pins the guy to the ground, and even though he's biting down on the blade of the power sword with his teeth shattering and his death spasms, coughing up blood, etc., the World Eater still gets some words out and tells Marduk Tamarus that he is weak, and that until he understands the path to glory, he will always be weak. Tamarus and his guys dispatch the World Eaters, but then are summoned to an audience with Fulgrim. But what we don't know, that Fulgrim somehow does know, is that the Emperor's champion has been chosen. A Black Templar by the name of Johannes Berenger. He has had a vision of the future, and it has himself standing with his gene father Rogal Dorn and fighting the heretics of the Third Legion, including their Primarch Fulgrim himself. And the Templars call this a holy vision and make him the Emperor's champion, give him the black sword and make him a symbol, etc. So he goes to Crucible to meet his destiny. In his vision, there was a warrior that stood between him and Fulgrim, who he felt it was his fate to kill, and he didn't know who that warrior was. Through the story, it becomes obvious that it is Tamarus the Perfect Blade. Now, Fulgrim has summoned all his best champions to the Vexation, his ship, and wants to reform his legion. He's woken up fully and come out of his stupor and wants to come back full force, but he finds his legion to be weak and undeserving of both the title of legion and of his personal leadership. So he wants to separate the wheat from the chaff. Fulgrim decides to throw all of his best guys into the meat grinder and see who comes out alive, to both lead the legion at his side and unify it again by being a symbol of perfection. He wants to know which of his sons deserves the title of basically Lord of Perfection. He wants the perfect soldier. And funny enough, Tamarus is called the Perfect Blade, something he gets dressed down for by Fulgrim as he repeatedly comes up short on his mission. But treachery is the cause, not the abilities of Tamarus. He proves himself time and again to be the ultimate warrior, but is getting played by Mavai the sorcerer. The siege begins with drop pods falling from the sky and the Emperor's children just swarming the Hive City in a full-on medieval-style siege. They have demon engines and other weapons at their disposal, but they don't do much except get repelled. Tamarus does get into a one-on-one fight with a foe that he finds unworthy, the Castellan of the Black Templars, but the guy's holding his ground and giving him all he's got in return. Tamarus is ultimately reminded that he, like this book, is not perfect. He only prevails because of what is happening in the air, with Valkyries and Stormhawks strafing and facing off against Venom Crawlers and Forge Fiends acting as anti-air support. The whole thing was messy and just really annoying for Tamarus, as he just wanted to face the Emperor's champion and kick everyone's ass and become Fulgrim's champion, as the Primarch wanted to choose his personal retort to the Emperor's own Johannes Berenger. So because the Castellan is torn in half by an explosion from the aerial battle, Tamarus is not able to get the clean, perfect kill and prove he's a badass. But still, he takes the Castellan's skull, though it is the Emperor's champion that he wants, ultimately. Fulgrim demands it. So basically, what happens is a series of back and forths. The chosen champions and their respective forces clashing, each getting withered down more and more as the story goes on, a grinding war of attrition. And Secundra has a story arc of her own, trying to navigate the Hive City and help people, to do her duty first, but that all erodes. She finds that traitor and loyalist lines are blurred among the working stiffs of the planet, who see themselves as slaves either way. But some of them reckon that at least the ruinous powers offer more than the Emperor, which only offered a life of toiling endlessly in misery and then death. At least Slaanesh would give you some sort of pleasure and enjoyment before you met your end. Eventually, Secunda does what she has to do to let as many people escape the siege as she can, ultimately realizing that the Black Templars, if victorious, would exact vengeance for their fallen on the local population, as it was known that there were a few traitors among the masses, and it is eventually revealed that the Slaanesh cultists are the ones who put out the cry for help when the Templars descended on their world. They just wanted help, as they were being treated very, very poorly, and it showed as the battle went on. They became ever more consistently used as chaff. Just handed tools and farming implements to go face Chaos Marines with. The Emperor's children didn't really feel that was fair of the Templars either, but it didn't stop them from absolutely massacring those who stood against them. So the regular folks are caught between a grim rock and a dark, hard place, or something like that, and you really can't blame them either way, and the story really goes out of the way to emphasize this. The protagonist of this story is an Emperor's Children Lord, essentially a Lord Exultant, but not only is he the main character, he's kind of the good guy of the story, if there is one, for the Templars proved to be just as, if not more, evil than the Emperor's children. But Tamarus wants to end all this, as Fulgrim is annoyed and actually dangerously so at this point. After summoning his champions before him to answer for their failures, Tamarus only boasted pridefully and didn't have anything to show for it, and Fulgrim let him know just how unacceptable that was. Fulgrim also dressed down Mavai, who was once his right-hand man in the past. So, eventually Marduk Tamarus leads an assault on the outposts that control access to the water supply, and the Emperor's children, specifically the Perfect Blades, the Perfecti, just butcher their way through a ton of people, but some of them get killed as well as they get massively overwhelmed. Then, as they finally manage to get the gene seed of their fallen brothers secured, the Templars show up, and Tamarus duels Berengar. Berengar is just too strong. Tamarus notices that Berengar is a Primarchs basically, and he feels that he is not perfect enough as this new Marine is better proportioned, taller, and stronger than he is. And he only survives the Emperor's champion this time by detonating a melt-a-bomb that he placed on a massive water storage tank. The blast just tears the room apart. Flooding occurs, sweeping everyone away in a tsunami. The Emperor's children who survived finding their way outside the city, away from everyone, but having massively damaged the abilities of the city to hold out as they cut off its water supply. And the people are already starving, and critically so. Cannibalism is about to start being the best way to survive. The only way to survive. Anyway, the champions get called back to meet with Fulgrim, who is pissed off that nobody has killed the Emperor's champion, and his invitation to meet with him is written on human skin, actually tattooed on and then flayed off the person. Delivered by a totally weird triplicate mutant thing that works for Fulgrim. You'll have to read the story to know what I'm talking about, but it's like 3 people smashed into one. Totally creepy little sorcerer dude who acts as a messenger in this story and keeps constantly shape-shifting in some pretty disgusting ways. So the Perfecti and Tamarus take a rhino to Fulgrim's new spot, and it is just way too steep and rocky to navigate, so they decide to hoof it. But before they exit the vehicle, Tamarus asks the driver if he's going to be able to go on, then threatens him, but dude says it won't budge. But the fun part is we see what makes Emperor's Children vehicles function. Instead of a machine spirit like Imperial Rhinos, this armored personnel carrier had 2 guys in the front seats driving. One was already dead and rotting. They weren't Astartes, but captives, who may or not have been Slaaneshi devotees, but they were chained to their seats, unable to leave, and there were 2 stalked tentacles growing out of the headrest behind the guy and slowly eating him, tiny lamprey-like mouths full of serrated teeth on the end of each appendage. It had already chewed out his eyes and taken his lips, and it devoured the other driver. This is the kind of weird demons that must be appeased to make Slaaneshi vehicles run, so that was cool to see. On the way up the mountain, it is a hard journey as they face off against a demon, one of the fiends of Slaanesh, bovine-headed, crab-clawed, and deadly. It is defeated but takes a heavy toll on the Perfecti, and they find that when they kill it, some bones with runes carved in them are left in its place, proving it was summoned against them with sorcery, and proving what Tamarus has thought the whole time, and what his apothecary and second-in-command have been routinely insisting. that the sorcerer Mavai is against them and has been holding back their progress so that they won't achieve victory, and he will claim the prize and be Fulgrim's right-hand man, the champion of the Perfect Son. Fulgrim has already met with Mavai and dressed him down. Now that Marduk Tamarus and his Perfecti enter the amazing palace that Fulgrim has built high up in the mountains, they're basically shocked at how beautiful it is. But they're called out in front of everyone as failures. There's a host of servants of the Phoenician gathered, demonettes, fiends, human cultists, that dude who's been turned into a living harp. Yeah, everyone is there, and a ton of the 3rd Legion as well. But Tamarus says, when flat out asked in front of everyone why he failed, he replied simply, treachery. And Fulgrim is taken aback after hearing the story of the treachery of Mavai. Now, one thing that he imparted on Mavai that he did not tell his other champions is that he was separating the wheat from the chaff, that he intended for many of his legion to die off in the conflict at Citadel on the world of Crucible, to purge weakness from his legion, so that they would again be worthy of the name the Emperor's Children, and that since Tamarus had repeatedly been able to thwart him, he was failing at his duty, that being the secret mission that he was given. For once Mavai was Fulgrim's second, and he wanted that back more than anything. So he was intended to betray his brothers, by Fulgrim's design. But the calling out of Mavai publicly made the Primarch react poorly, and he got all bent and he turned out all the lights, disappeared in a warp shadow, and said, "Kill each other till only the strong remain." And it went crazily brutal. The entire chamber was carved out of one giant amethyst, and huge chunks of the ceiling the size of rhinos fell from it into the crowd, smashing dozens of demonettes and people alike. Fulgrim was straight pissed, and the fighting got to be so brutal that more of the perfect blades fell, and the commotion became utter chaos. The mayhem was described as chaos itself. Now, before I go on to the conclusion of the story, I have to address a couple of things that the community has really been running with over this book and getting wrong. There's a narrative out there that this is somehow mostly a Black Templars book, with an Imperial Guard side quest, and barely features the Emperor's Children in Fulgrim at all. And that is just incorrect. There's less Fulgrim than people might like, but this story isn't exactly about him. Until the very end, you realize that it was the whole time, but we'll get to that. Yes, this is very much an Emperor's Children story, and very much the story of a Chaos Champion, who would be called a Chaos Lord as far as the tabletop game goes. He's vying for second in command to Fulgrim himself, so yeah, he's powerful. But this is ultimately not Fulgrim's story, so I personally feel that the name is quite misleading. I also feel that him coming back deserved more of a lion, son of the forest sort of treatment, where we follow him as a main point of view character, instead of a force of nature manipulating events in the background. That said, Fulgrim is also definitely not a Black Templars book. There's very little point of view from the Emperor's Champion, and it is intermittently and sparsely spread throughout the story in such a way that it just adds context and texture, fleshing it out a bit. Doesn't really make it seem like he's the protagonist. In fact, the Emperor's Champion is portrayed as an antagonist, and if you are an Imperial fan, then you might not really dig this, but he's treated as if he is totally deluded, and he is. Fighting a fight that he can't win, against a Primarch who can't be killed, yet he will die trying. Yeah, Johannes Berenger of the Black Templars is totally delusional, and perfectly sums up that Templars sort of fanaticism that they're so known for. Yes, the worst aspects of them are on full display. Now, one thing that gets hammered into our heads in this book is just what Fulgrim wants and how he sees himself. So he sees himself as the only one of the Primarchs who was made perfect, the only one to exceed their father's own power, grace, skill, perfection, kindness, mastery, etc. Insert any adjective, and Fulgrim thinks he's the best of the best at that, and his father was jealous of him and his perfection. So Fulgrim thinks that his father scorned him and cast him aside instead of loving him, and he should have been loved, and justifies his disloyalty to the Emperor because of this. And this scorn is indeed, in Fulgrim's mind, based in jealousy and fear that the son would exceed the father and render him obsolete. So Fulgrim too is totally delusional, and he sees himself as the heir to the Imperium and wants to take the throne. which now turns 40K into Game of Thrones, as Abaddon wants that too. Okay, so back to our story and the Perfecti, fleeing the second gathering of Fulgrim's court on the world of Crucible. Tamarus knows that his personal failure to both capture Citadel and bring the Primarch, the head of the Emperor's champion, is what is infuriating Fulgrim, and he knows that the sorcerer Mavai is working against him. So, he is put into a position that he knows is a very underdog position, and still he carries on to try to prevail. So Marduk Tamarus strides up to the Crucible gates and just holds up the head of the Castellan until someone notices him and he demands a one-on-one duel with the Emperor's champion. And Tamarus eventually gets it, but his whole legion betrays him, and even Fulgrim shows up and they all circle around to watch. But he was literally trying to settle it all with an honor duel, so was totally annoyed, even with his Primarch, who he has started to realize may not be so perfect himself. And the duel is gnarly. Fulgrim tells the Templars that the Emperor chose his own champion, and he'd like the right to pick his own himself as well. So, told them to shut up so he could watch and he'd be cool while they fought. But the Emperor's champion gets the better of Tamarus and nearly guts him. He messes the perfect blade up so bad, and Tamarus lays battered, and Berengar is poised to deliver the killing blow, and Fulgrim asks if anyone is worthy among those gathered to be his champion. Then declares he's bored and tired of all this, and then says, "Kill them all," and his guys go to town. A regiment of Cadian Guard runs out to fight them and gets cut down, completely massacred, but they are able to buy enough time to recover the body of the Emperor's champion, who only wanted to get to Fulgrim, but was attacked by a demon engine. The monster, which by the description in the book I'm assuming was a Mauler fiend, bit the arm off the champion and got his black sword, thrice blessed by the Emperor himself. But in doing so, it had the blade shoved down its throat, piercing its heart and exploding it. The Emperor's champion almost dies. The perfect blade almost dies. His apothecary, Vinikar, who was his second in command, came to heal him up as best he could. Tamarus was wounded bodily pretty bad, but his pride was wounded critically. And his boys, his own squad who have been with him the whole book, betray him. Totally and completely. Just cold-blooded. He's rendered paralyzed by his apothecary, Vinikar, who put paralytics mixed into his combat stems to make him less effective in combat, not more. And Vinikar had recovered the black sword of the Emperor's champion. It was quite a betrayal, and Vinikar informed Tamarus, as he lay there battered, that he had been working with Mavai the whole time. And you'll notice this throughout the story in hindsight, as Vinikar was taking the gene seed from fallen Marines who weren't even all the way dead, and even the debased reprobates of the 3rd Legion were like, "Dude, that's totally messed up." And the unthinkable happens to our protagonist. They start removing his gene seed organs, and he is still alive, just paralyzed. He's completely failed Fulgrim, he's been betrayed 3 or 4 times over, and now by his only remaining 2 guys. His second in command and Nathier, the dude who just goes totally melee and wields dual power claws. And this is where we see that the author really plotted this novel using the hero's journey structure. The most telling part is Tamarus' death and resurrection, or that is the lens it should be looked through in regards to the hero's journey. This is Perseus descending into the underworld. Tamarus the Perfect Blade is brutally mutilated by Vinikar, the apothecary, and his second, while the paralytic effects still had him immobilized. The apothecary cut him open to remove his progenoid gland and what other organs he could, while Tamarus was still alive, leaving him a mutilated, bloody mess. But Tamarus was able to escape by rolling into what was essentially a river of sewage, plunging under the surface and being washed out, away from the city, barely clinging to life. But that isn't the end of our hero, not by a long shot. Mavai needed every gene seed organ he could get from all the fallen Marines, Emperor's children and Black Templars alike, that the apothecary had collected throughout the book. And he had 35 organs. I believe they were all progenoid glands. Mavai told Vinikar that they needed to be 36 for the ritual to work, and that he really needed not only one more, but that it needed to be obtained through treachery and betrayal. So Vinikar kills Nathier and takes his progenoid. Mavai sacrifices every one of the glands to Slaanesh and gets a power-up. He wants to ascend to demonhood so bad, but I think Slaanesh has other plans for him in mind. Tamarus is barely clinging to life. Throat gouged open by Vinikar's chain knife, he's lying face down in the mud, just in a bad place. And he gets pulled out of the mud and carried off to recover in a cave by the locals who left the city to wait out the war. And this faction were Slaanesh aligned and had been the ones to call for help with the Templars in the first place. So they nurse him back to health as best they can, feeding him literally all the food they have, enough for probably dozens of people. And Tamarus had his face removed and the skin stretched over his skull and riveted back on, and that tears off, eventually hanging only by one thread. He hangs out with the locals, but they eventually help him out tremendously and he gets totally hooked up. Slaanesh recognized him as a champion, and he basically ascends to be a possessed marine. Demonic energy floods into him, and he agrees to whatever deal with the devil, the demon god of excess and perfection, demanded. Tamarus had no face, but he didn't need one. He had a newfound power and awesomeness within himself, and he climbs really high up into the upper Citadel levels, and he watches as the Emperor's children invade, finally breaching the walls, smashing into the Hive City in full force, led by Fulgrim and Mavi. But Tamarus just watches. He hunts for the white-armored apothecary and tracks him from above. And Tamarus gets his revenge, slaughtering the treacherous Vinikar and taking the Emperor's champion's black sword for himself. Then he comes upon the final battle. Mavi and the Emperor's champion going at it, just totally life and death in-game battle, and Mavi has incapacitated the Emperor's champion, Johannes Berengar, shocking him so badly with some magenta warp lightning that the power armor fritzed out and the joints seized up, leaving Berengar essentially paralyzed. Mavi stands over Berengar, ready to deliver the killing blow, and Tamarus just chops him from the back, stabbing right through him, and was like, "Hey, payback's a bitch, bro. Thanks for cheating so hard the whole time, but I won in the end anyway." Tamarus introduces himself and shows he's got the black sword, Berengar's own holy blessed blade. Berengar no longer holds the sword, and he no longer has the golden glow in his vision. Truly, the Emperor has turned his gaze away from the champion. The Emperor's champion even fires a round from his bolt pistol, nearly taking Tamarus' head off, to which the perfect blade scolds him for cheating in an honor duel. But he gets the better of Tamarus for the most part, knowing that this is the man from his vision that stood between him and the corrupted son of the Emperor, the Primarch Fulgrim. And yes, he just goes to town on the perfect blade. It's pretty evenly matched, but he winds up getting the better of Tamarus, striking a strong blow across his thigh and one over his eye that partially blinds him with blood gushing down his face. Truly, Tamarus is about to lose, even as Citadel is falling. And the war erupts around them. Berengar demands that Fulgrim fight him one-on-one as the battlements are swarmed with the various warriors and demons of Slaanesh. Fulgrim just shakes his head and says, "Kill this fool." Demonettes and noise marines are swarming everywhere. Black Templars, civilians, Astra Militarum, the handful that remain, are all throwing themselves and everything they have right back. It's total chaos. A swirling melee. A whirling storm of blades and bolters, just death all around. But Berengar only wants one thing, to face Fulgrim, because he feels that is his destiny. That is what the Emperor created him to do. The Emperor's champion knows that the battle is lost. There isn't even a chance that they may bleed the Emperor's children dry or do any real damage to them at all. The Templars are fallen. The Hive City of Citadel is completely overrun and in the hands of chaos. So he just wants to put his sword into Fulgrim and feels that that is what the Emperor himself wants for him. The battle swarms over the battlements and where the champion is, and a tide of chaos sweeps through, and he's just putting everything to his sword. Many demonettes died, and Fulgrim is standing over him leering, demanding someone bring him the champion's head, and he sees Tamarus before him and the perfect son of the Emperor. Tamarus sees him too, they lock eyes, and the final showdown ensues. Berengar fights through the sea of Slaaneshi corruption to get to Tamarus, but Tamarus is on his way too. Noise Marines are reducing the entire area into a sonic hellscape, and Berengar and Tamarus are separated. Berengar eventually carves a path through the enemies before him, mostly demonettes, even through the chaos of the Noise Marines' weapons, and even as sight and sound blurred into one sensation, he fought his way to Fulgrim, and the final conflict in Berengar's mind is on. until he gets backstabbed by Tamarus, as he's completely transfixed and fixated on stabbing Fulgrim. Though that is a weird goal to have, as he'd probably be aware that as a demon prince, the Phoenician is immortal and unkillable, at least permanently. But it is shocking to him when the sword stabs through his chest from behind, and he can read the words on the blade that now read Filius Lux instead of Imperator Lux. Light of the sun now instead of light of the Emperor. The Emperor's champion realizes his vision was true. He'd fight the man that stood between himself and Fulgrim, and he'd meet the Emperor, and he falls to his knees, unable to do anything but look up, as he lacked the strength by then for anything else. And the last thing Johannes Berengar, the Emperor's champion, saw was his own black blade fall to claim his head, sending him to his Emperor. Tamarus takes the head of the Emperor's champion, and Fulgrim takes the city and the planet. Tamarus is an interesting character in that he fought with honor, despite all the treachery he was surrounded by. He was constantly betrayed, and he endured. Through his own perfecti and his second-in-command, through the rival of rivals in the sorcerer Mavai, Tamarus endured. In the end, Slaanesh chose him. Before even Fulgrim did, the god itself chose Tamarus in the cave. Where Mavai had to make a huge sacrifice to Slaanesh, Tamarus was a natural, and it paid off. But the story's not quite over, as there is the triumph, the Roman-style parade with all the pomp and ceremony that would befit one such as Fulgrim in victory, one who is the son of the Emperor and the rightful heir of the Imperium. So there's a great procession, the people who fled to the hills have returned, there's a massive parade, and it ends at Fulgrim, seated in a giant throne carved from some local gemstone. It's opulence on a massive level. And Tamarus makes his way to Fulgrim and is presented to all present as the Phoenicians' champion. He's faceless, with just a mess of gore, but he's transcended, something more now. And he doesn't give a speech, just lets Fulgrim talk. And as he's standing there, he realizes that it was better to have lost this game on Crucible than to have won. For today, he has the laurels of victory, but tomorrow he will just be something his lord has grown bored of. And he will just be in the same place that Mavai was in. And Fulgrim leans in and calls Mardu Tamarus his perfect son. In this way, Fulgrim is just playing out his own childhood trauma over and over, with his own son standing in for himself while he plays the role of his father. It's actually pretty sick and totally Slaaneshi in how depraved it is. But make no mistake, Fulgrim is coming and he wants the throne. He's taken a world that will allow him to produce a lot of goods, and he's got the local population on his side already.